Welcome, folks, to another episode of jbassers Exposed Vet Productions. My name's John Stacy. They call me Basser. Basser is the official name that I've always had for the past 40 years. Today is Thursday. It's August 28th, 2025, and we got a special show today. We got one and only Mr. Barry Fraley. He's riding side saddle today. How you doing, Barry?
I'm good. Top side of the grass.
Good. And our guest today is, don't need an introduction. This is Mr. Jim Radonga. Jim Radonga is an accredited VA appeals agent based out of the beautiful city of San Diego. He's part of the Eagle Veterans Law with Katrina Eagle. Uh, that's pretty cool. Today we're going to discuss effective dates. And this is a very interesting topic, so we haven't done this in a while. Jim, how you doing?
I'm doing really well, John. It's good to see you. It's been a while. It's been a while
Been
since
a
I've been
real
on
good
the show,
while.
but VA's been keeping me busy every moment since last time I saw you.
That's good, man. It's if you don't like the way the VA does, just turn around and you might start to like it. And next thing you know, they give you something else to crap about. So,
Oh,
it's like a
absolutely.
revolving door.
Yeah, yeah, it really is. And
Mhm.
lately, it's really been a challenge because they've been bragging about getting their numbers up, and they're knocking down the backlog, and they're processing more claims than ever. But that's great. That's a great headline, but in the real world, the quality is just gotten it's crazy. I've
Mhm.
never in all my years I've never seen poorer quality decisions. I mean, they are just blowing through and denying, and even if it's a grant, they're messing up the rating, they're messing up the effective dates. It's too bad because they're just pushing people too hard. They got among these raters and VSRs on quotas, and they're putting up these great frontline numbers, but I mean, that's not what veterans want. Veterans want good decisions. They don't want to have to appeal and appeal and appeal. But unfortunately, that's not what the headlines say. But that's what we're seeing here in our office and what all our colleagues are. But you know, it goes in waves, and hopefully it'll settle back down uh, and get
You
moving.
guys,
But
maybe you guys can discuss that at the NOVA conference in a couple of weeks. Get that out in the open.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's something that Nova members talk about. And there'll be people from VA there, and we'll tell them about it. And it's the kind of I was at the NACVSO conference in July in Louisville, and I'll just say a high level, very very high level VA leadership was there, and he's presenting, and he does the Q&A, and pretty much most of the VSOs were like, "Hey, what's with the quality, man? It's like this is crazy. You're denying everybody." And he just didn't answer the question, like
Hmm.
politicians do, and it was a shame. And I'm glad, I'm glad they brought it up. It's like, hey, brag all you want about how fast you're moving and knocking down the backlog, but
Hmm.
let's focus on quality. Let's focus on taking care of veterans. And when you take care of veterans, is you get it right, and you give them what they deserve, and you don't make them wait, and you don't make them appeal over and over and over again. And
Hmm.
it's very very frustrating. But anyway, that segues into what I want to talk about today, which is effective dates. Effective dates have been a real issue with VA. This isn't recent. This is going back years. I'm going to say probably a good 4 or 5 years. It's gotten bad. Got really bad, particularly in the beginning of the PACT Act. Kind of understandable. They got overloaded with all these new claims, and the PACT Act is a liberalizing law. It's got a lot of moving parts when it comes to effective date. So I kind of got that. I'm like, okay, they got to learn this. They had quick training and so on. So they'll get, and they have gotten a little bit better on that. But now, like I was just talking about, the quality of decisions on every level is really bad, and effective dates have actually gotten worse again. So what I want to do today is I want to go through just some examples of what we see as effective date errors. Some of them are really ridiculous, and some are a little deeper in the weeds. But it's really important that veterans and advocates understand this, because I'm not going to speculate as to why they're making all of these errors and effective dates, but the big picture is that when they do, if they have an advocate, like myself or an attorney, we're going to catch it and we're going to fix it, right? But how about all of these veterans that are on their own, right? And their effective date's wrong, and they don't know what to do about it. They don't understand. They're like, boy, I thought I was going to get benefits. I thought I was going to get more back pay than that, and they don't know what to do with it, right? So then VA gets to keep the money. Or situations where maybe it's a VSO that doesn't understand. We do, as you know, Katrina and I, we train VSOs around the country, have been for years. We focus a lot on effective dates with them. We drill it into them. We give them as much training as we can on this, because we need them to understand, all the different intricacies of this, so they can spot it and they can fix it. Because every time there's a wrong effective date and it doesn't get fixed, it's not fair to the veteran. It's not fair to the surviving spouse. And guess what? VA's keeping their money, and I'm not okay with that. I'll be perfectly honest with you. So anyway, so let's go through some common effects. It's not all of them, and I'm not going to get too deep in the weeds with some of the clear and unmistakable errors and 3.156C and things that you're familiar with. But that's a little deep in the weeds, and it'll take too much time. But I want to talk about some of the common ones and how we attack them, how we get them fixed. Some of them are really easy, some are a little bit more difficult. So the first one, and this one just boggles the mind. This happens a lot, and that's where veteran will file an intent to file, and within a year they'll file a claim. All right, claim gets granted, and the effective date is the date of the claim. They just completely miss the intent to file. It's like it didn't exist. The good news about that is those are pretty easy to fix. You just do a higher level review and just let them know, hey, the ITF was filed on this date. Please fix it. They'll usually fix it pretty quickly. And with something about that is that that's something where it's actually, and you almost never hear these two words out of my mouth at the same time. It's an easy, clear, and unmistakable error. Clear and unmistakable errors are, in most instances, are pretty darn near impossible. They are extremely difficult to win clear and unmistakable error. Mm-hmm. But in a situation like this, where they miss the ITF, even if it was 5 years ago, you can file a clear and unmistakable error, and you will probably win. You should win with no, because there's no excuse for that. Missing an ITF that's filed within a year is indeed a clear and unmistakable error. So now, I don't know how VA did this. So about a couple of years ago, back actually 2021, there was a case. It was called Military Veterans Advocacy versus the Secretary. And what they decided, it was a federal circuit case, and they said, because when the AMA, Appeals Modernization Act, first came out, they said that you can an intent to file attaches to a new claim, right? But it doesn't attach to a supplemental claim. Even though supplemental claims, as you know, can reopen a claim. You can file a supplemental claim. Let's say you had a claim denied 20 years ago. You can now file a supplemental claim and reopen that. So Military Veterans Advocacy, NOVA, bunch of law firms all got together. Military Veterans Advocacy, which is that's the organization that's pretty much created the Blue Water Navy. They won the Procopio decision. They're the great organization, but they got top billing, And
John Wells.
these firms were fighting and saying, "Hey, VA, why can't we do an intent to file on a supplemental claim rather than a new claim?" So Federal Circuit said, "You know what? You're right. Absolutely, VA, you have to allow a supplemental claim. I'm sorry, an intent to file if a supplemental claim is filed to reopen a claim, right? So not a supplemental claim for an appeal, but the other supplemental claim where you're reopening an old claim that's
Mm-hmm.
been denied more than a year ago, right? Great. So VA, that was in 2021. In 2023, they finally put this into the M21 manual. All right. It takes them a couple of years. And they interpreted the court decision entirely wrong. And they said, okay, the ITF attaches to a supplemental claim that's used as an appeal. All right. Doesn't really make sense because you have a year to appeal, file a supplemental claim. You don't really need an ITF. So the upside to that is in a case where you file a supplemental claim as an appeal, you can actually now get 2 years. Like if you file an ITF, you get a whole nother year to file the supplemental claim. So that's the upside. But the downside is the way VA has interpreted this is that if you have a supplemental claim, if you file a supplemental claim in the middle, so let me give you an example. Okay, so you file a claim um, for hypertension, whatever, like in January. Um, and then the veteran files 6 months later, files an intent to file because they want to claim some other stuff, right? And they're gathering their medical evidence and they have a year to do
Mm-hmm.
it. Then the hypertension claim ultimately gets granted. VA will assign an effective date of the date of the supplemental claim because in their reasoning, they're saying, well, the supplemental claim attached to that ITF, that intent to file. So instead of giving you the proper effective date of January, because that's when you filed it, they're saying, no, it's June. Right? It's bizarre and it's at the courts now and it's probably going to get overturned. But here's the problem with this. This is in the M21, which means that no one at the regional office level can correct that, right? So if you go to a higher level review, a decision review officer, they might say, hey, Jim, you're right. This doesn't make any sense at all. But I can't do anything about it. I am bound by the M21. The M21 tells me I have to do it this way. I can't do anything about it. So the only way for a veteran to get that fixed today is they have to go to the board. And you go to the board, and the board's like, and the board doesn't, that board doesn't care about the M21. The board's like, forget about it. And it will fix that effective date. But the problem is for some people, if you're not AOD, that might take years to get that decision from the board. So anyway, that's kind of a downside, but it is at the courts now. And, once the courts finally rule on it, they're going to overturn it because VA got it entirely wrong. Okay, another
Be the
common
first
problem
time.
we see. I'm sorry.
Won't be the first time.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Another one, this is really frustrating. So VA gives it the effective date, the date of your latest C&P exam. So you put in a claim or you put in a claim for an increase or whatever, right? A year ago, 2 years ago. And then you do a C&P exam and they grant. So VA will then give us the effective date, not the original date of claim or the intent to file, but the date of the latest exam. And they particularly do this when it's an increased rating claim because they'll say, oh, you know what? There's no proof. I mean, that's the only proof that we have that the condition actually got worse. Well,
Mm-hmm.
that's ridiculous because, I claimed it a long time ago. So how we handle those two different ways. If there's evidence in the record that the condition worsened before, then we just do a high level review and we just point to the evidence. The evidence right here. This has been bad for this amount of time. And in a situation where there's not clear evidence of the record, then we'll do a supplemental claim and we'll add some new medical records, right? So it's uh, it's a pain because at the end of the day, there's I can't imagine there's ever been a situation where the date of the exam is the proper effective date. You didn't
Mm.
person just didn't get sick or get worse the day they showed up for the exam, right? I mean, it was long before that, but they do this pretty regularly. Um, okay, here's another one. All right, so you have a veteran gets granted, and they get a low ball rating. Let's say they get a 30% rating, but clearly the evidence shows they're entitled to a 70% rating, right? So within a year, they'll file for an appeal, be it a higher level review or a supplemental claim. And they'll appeal the original ratings. This original rating is wrong. I disagree with this. So what VA will do, if they grant the increased rating, they will assign the date of the higher level review or the supplemental claim, and they'll say, well, you're asking for an increased rating.
Yeah,
And
seen that.
but you're not asking for an increased rating. I'm appealing the low ball
The
rating you
original.
gave me. Right. So in that case, we do an HLR, and it's in the M21. The M21 specifically addresses that situation. So we'll point to their own M21 provision and say, oh no, M21 tells you don't do it this way. But that is one of the most common. We see that very very frequently where they'll do that, and it could be years of back pay that they're taking
Is it the
away.
same person doing all this, or is it? Because I know they use the, when every regional office don't get every claim. It rotates. I guess they pulled it off of the as they
It's
get
a
it in. It
national
gets
work queue. So
in
yeah,
that
we see it.
NWQ.
Yeah, national work queue. Yeah, we see it everywhere. We see it. I haven't
It's,
identified any
so
particular
not
regional
just
office.
one regional office. It happens in a lot of different ones.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of these things that I'm talking about, we're seeing pretty much everywhere. So if I were a conspiracy theorist, I'd say
Mm.
maybe there's something nefarious going on here. Why is it that they're all making the same
Narrative.
dumb mistakes? And
Hmm.
I don't know. I'm just saying. But are they throwing it against the wall and seeing what sticks? And because again, I mean, think about it. Like I say, if this happens and they're represented, we're going to fix it, right? But how many veterans aren't represented and they just give up?
Mm.
So I don't know. Another one, reasonably raised claims, or they call scope of claim. So the let's say the person gets granted for diabetes, right?
Hmm.
And in the as you know, in the initial when they do the DBQ, they're going to be looking for uh, diabetic peripheral neuropathy, retinopathy, all the the common complications. So the VA will miss that, and they'll grant the diabetes, but they won't grant the complications. So then the veteran, a
Hmm.
year or 2 years later, will put in a claim, say, I've got neuropathy, I've got retinopathy, I've got kidney issues, whatever the case may be. They'll put in a claim. VA will then assign the date of the new claim as the effective date. But that's not what the law says. Is if they had that complication at the effective date of the grant of diabetes, they are entitled to the same effective date. And there's no requirement to put in a claim. Okay? So same thing with like if you have back issues and you have radiculopathies, those are all within the scope of the claim. So
Okay.
the proper effective date is back to when the date of the original claim for
Or
diabetes. Right. Or now let's say, for
is that
example, um, let's say you didn't get neuropathy till a year later, right? Then that would be the proper effective date for the neuropathy is would be a year later, right? Because the date entitlement arose. But typically by the time these claims get granted, you know, and they have diabetes, they've already they already had the neuropathy or the retinopathy or whatever the complications were.
Mm-hmm.
So that's in that case, we file a higher level review and, cite to the law and
Mm-hmm.
cite to the M21 and just kind of argue and say, no, this is wrong. Um,
Mm-hmm.
this one's my favorite: individual unemployability.
Mm-hmm.
VA seems to think that the effective date for individual employee IU claim is always the date that you file the VA Form 21-8940, which is the application for individual unemployability. They'll automatically assign that date. But legally, the proper effective date for individual unemployability is, as long as a claim's open, right? So you have a claim stream open, could be for a year, could be for 20 years. And there's evidence in the record of unemployability. The effective date goes back to when there's that first evidence, as long as the claim's still open. It's
Mm-hmm.
almost never the effective date should almost never be the date you file the 8940, because you've already stopped working, you've got all these issues. By the time you get your paperwork together and file your 8940, you've already probably been unemployable for quite some time. Um,
I'm probably getting hungry too.
yeah, so that we'll do an HLR, and sometimes on that we've got to go to the board, uh, because VA will dig their heels in, but they do that pretty commonly, and that could be, it could be months or it could be many years. There's, we've won
Mm-hmm.
cases where 10, 15 years earlier effective date based on IU, because they've kept the claim alive all that time. Um, I More TDIU. This one, I really love this one. So you put in a claim for IU, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the effective date should be, let's say a year ago, 2 years ago, and you work in this, you're fighting this. So as you know, when you put in a claim for IU, VA is going to do an exam on every condition you have currently that you're saying causes the IU, and they're gonna do a new exam, right? So what will happen sometimes is they'll do all these exams, right? And they'll come back and say, okay, we're going to give you that 70% you had from PTSD, we're going to raise that up to 100%, right? Um, so that's going to be, the effective date is going to be the date of the exam, right? And they'll say IU is moot because you're already 100%. And with IU, you get paid at 100%. So it's moot. So we're not going to adjudicate the IU. But it's not moot because the effective date for the IU might be 3 years ago. And you're trying to, so you're giving me, 100% schedule rating, as of a week ago Thursday when I went to the exam, but IU's not moot. So, in that case, we file an HR, and then that is specifically in the M21. They discuss that. And it actually says in the M21 that IU is not moot if there's a possibility of an earlier effective date. And we see a lot of times in the rating decision, they'll say, you're 100% scheduler. IU is moot because there's no possibility of an earlier effective date. They write that right in there and say, oh, hold on a second. Of course there is. So that's what they do. Okay, increased rating claims. They get these wrong a lot too. If you put in an increased rating claim, you can get up to an additional year of effective date. So if you put in an increased rating claim today, your effective date can actually go back a year earlier. This is one of the rare instances where you can actually get an effective date earlier than the date of claim. So the way it works is if there's evidence of an increase, evidence of worsening within the file within a year, of the claim for an increase, you can get that. It can't be more than a year, and this is kind of where it gets a little bit tricky. If there's evidence filed a year and a half ago, then you don't get the additional effective date. It's got to be within a year, and they got to Congress or the courts got to fix that. But anyway, I digress. So oftentimes, what VA will do, they'll almost always assign the effective date as the date that you filed for the increase, and they'll never look back to see if you actually worsened 2 months ago, 3 months ago, a year ago. So in those instances, what we'll do, if there's evidence in the record that it worsened, we'll just do an HLR and point to that. If there's not evidence, we'll get evidence and we'll do a supplemental claim and say, hey, it actually, we have some medical records. And that can even be, it can even be lay evidence. It could even be testimony. It's a little tough for them, but it doesn't have to be medical evidence. As long as there's some evidence in the file that, that's credible evidence that the condition worsened prior to the date of claim within a year, that should be the proper effective date. Okay, DIC, and I don't know how they do this, but they mess up DIC dates. So, as we know, if surviving spouse files, or surviving child, whatever, DIC recipient files within a year of the veteran's death, the proper effective date is the first day of the month of the veteran's death. All right, goes back automatically. VA messes that up. Not all the time, but once in a while, they'll just give the effective date as the date of the claim, and they won't go back to the date of death. All right, so that's usually a pretty easy HLR. And this is kind of like an IT. If they get this wrong and they discover it 3 years from now, pretty clear cut Q claim, clear and unmistakable error. So next is NEMR or Blue Water Navy claims. So we know there's earlier effective date provisions for NEMR and Blue Water, and it can go back decades. Right? Typically goes back to the original claim. Believe it or not, VA will mess that up more so with Blue Water Navy than NEMR, because they're a little better at NEMR. They've got like these NEMR teams and special ROs handle it. But sometimes with Blue Water Navy, it'll be a Blue Water Navy grant. And this would be particularly an instance where, let's say you get a grant from the board, right? it's a Blue Water Navy case, and VA's been denying it, saying, yeah, we can't locate the ship within the 12 nautical miles. So you go to the board and you keep fighting it. And we've won a lot of cases like with, get like professional dead reckoning and things like that. And the board will then grant. And specifically in the board decision, they'll say, yes, it's conceded that the veteran was within the 12 nautical miles. It's at least as likely as not, that they're in the 12 miles. So after the board decision, it goes back to the regional office, and the regional office sets the effective dates and the ratings and so on. The regional office will give an effective date of the latest claim. They won't go back to the first claim like they're supposed to. So even though you won the board decision, you've got to then fight with them again and say, hey, so in those we'll do an HLR and cite to the specific law and M21 provisions and so on. But it's frustrating because, it might have taken years for the board to get this right. And then it goes back to the regional office. And the regional office says, okay, we're just going to screw you out of some effective date here. Maybe 15 years, maybe 20 years. SMC, one of your favorite subjects, right? Effective dates on those.
Right.
They will, like, let's say it's for aid and attendance or loss of use. Very often they will go to, as the effective date, they'll go to the date of the exam, right? They'll say, oh yeah, okay, so date of exam last week, yeah, you need aid and attendance, and here's the date. But that's not the right effective date. The SMC is an inferred claim, right? It's like a reasonably raised claim, just like diabetes complications. If there is evidence of your need for aid and attendance or your loss of use or whatever the case may be for SMC, that is the date, is when there's evidence, and there's always evidence. I mean, by the time a veteran goes out and gets with their doctor and gets a 2680 form and gets all this, they've needed aid and attendance or they've had a loss of use for months or years. But VA will screw that up, and they'll even mess up like SMCK cases where loss of use, and they'll just miss it. They just and it's $130 a month. It's not going to break anybody's bank, but they will fail to grant that. Or SMCS, right, where
Mm-hmm.
you have 100% plus 60, that's automatic, and sometimes they'll just miss it. They won't pay it. So this is
Just a
another
lot of them silly.
situation. Yeah, this is another situation where this would be a queue, even if you appealed it years later, because it's right in the law. It is an inferred claim, and as far as especially SMCS, I mean, when you hit that 100% for a single disability and a combined 60%, you're entitled to it no matter what. Okay, PACT Act. They're still doing this, not as bad. So PACT Act is a liberalizing law, right? And what that means is you can get, um, typically the earliest date you can get is August, effective date is August 10th, 2022, because that's the date that it was signed into law. And they don't have, for veterans, they don't have any provisions for an earlier effective date like Blue Water Navy did or NEMA. Congress said, yeah, for veterans, we're limiting the date to the date of the law, right? For survivors, DIC recipients, they actually allow for an earlier effective date, okay? Because there's a lot less survivors than there is veterans. So, how the liberalizing law works is that you can go back as early as August 10, 2022, or if you file it now and you meet all the right criteria, check the right boxes, your effective date can be a year. It's kind of like an increase, right? It can be a year earlier. You file it today. Let's say you file an ITF today, get it granted, 6 months from now. The effective date, there's a couple of little, you got to meet all the criteria. I'm not going to get too deep in the weeds, but for the most part, the effective date should be a year ago today, all right? Because that's part of the liberalizing law. So they'll mess that up, and that's usually, we can fix that with an HLR. Um, Here's another one with PACT Act is that the, there's a lot of raiders since the PACT Act that just got locked into that August 10th, 2022 is the effective date. They just decided, you know what? No matter what, we're just going to give the PACT Act effective date. Okay, and this is a situation where you see like Thailand veterans, Guam veterans, um, Gulf War veterans, where the PACT Act added these new locations, right? There's a lot of circumstances where Thailand veterans have been fighting this for 10 years, or Guam veterans, so on. So all of a sudden, PACT Act comes into effect, and they're presumptively granted now. So VA will grant them, and they'll say, your effective date is, say, August 10th, 2022, or it could be later depending on when you claimed it, because we're almost 3 years ago that the PACT Act went into effect. But what they're not taking into account is that you've been fighting this and continuously pursuing it for 10 years, like you first put in your Thailand claim. So that becomes a fight, because even though they grant, the PACT Act allows for presumptive service connection, okay? You're in Thailand. PACT Act changed the law. If you're in Thailand and you have one of the Agent Orange diseases, you get the presumption right. So, but what they have to do legally is they also have to consider direct service connection. So they have to go back and look at your original claim, which was before the PACT Act. It wasn't for presumptive because there was no presumption in Thailand or Guam, right? So it was direct service connection. You're trying to prove you're at or near the perimeter of the base, whatever the case may be, you were directly exposed. So these cases are a little bit tougher. The burden of proof is on the veteran. They've got to kind of go back and just keep hammering away at that claim that they started in the beginning. And the burden of proof is on them to show that, yeah, I was directly exposed. I was near the perimeter, whatever the case may be. I have not seen the regional office get these right. So they pretty much have to go to the board. I mean, anything's possible, but these are significant because, again, these can be 10, 15-year-old claims that they've been fighting them and keeping them alive. VA automatically defaults to that no earlier than August 10th, 2022. So, and I'm not going to say VA gets these wrong as much as they just don't care. Like they should look and say, hey, they've continuously pursued this, and they should look and see if they can grant. But these are situations where they're in a hurry and they're just going to give you the later effective date, and you've got to fight those. But we've won a number of those. Most of them are a fight. Some of them have taken a couple of years, but and all at the board. Another PACT Act issue is that, as I just mentioned, for surviving spouses, for the most part, because there's always exceptions, but for the most part, they're entitled to an earlier effective date. And it's very much structured. Congress structured it for surviving spouses, DIC recipients, pretty much the same way as Blue Water Navy. So they could go back to, let's say, a surviving veteran died in 2009, and the surviving spouse filed the DIC claim, and they denied it. They're a Thailand veteran, right? And now, fast forward to after 2022, with the PACT Act, once they're granted, the effective date for the survivor would go back to 2009. Even if they didn't continuously pursue it, they could have dropped the claim after the first denial, which is the same as Blue Water. That was the beauty of Blue Water. Is whenever you file that first claim, doesn't matter if you appealed it properly or whatever, could have died on the vine for 20 years, you get the earlier effective date. So that's what Congress is kind of a compromise, because they're looking to save money. Unfortunately, they didn't do that for veterans, but they did for spouses. But very oftentimes, what we'll find is in the situation of the survivor, they don't give them the proper effective date. They just give them the effective date of the new claim. So usually you can fix that with a higher level review. A little more PACT Act.
Daggone good. You must have some good high level review guys out in your area. I'm telling you.
Yeah, you know what? We're really good at what we do. We give them an offer they can't refuse. If we have the law behind us, we put them in a situation where the law is the law. We use their rules, right? Very important. I know a lot of advocates out there are, the M21 is garbage. Don't use. Let me tell you something. The M21 is golden if you know how to use it, because the M21 is their Bible. At the regional office, and that includes higher level reviewers, they have to use it. So we use that against them. We find provision in the M21 says, your rater did it this way, but the M21 right here says they had to do it this way. You have to overturn. And they do. Because, and I've talked to DROs about that, and they're like, hey, I got covered. Because if it's in the M21 and quality control comes after me, they can't ding me, because I just point to it, say, hey, it's right there. That's what the M21 said to do. So the M21 is magical if you use it properly at the regional office level. Once you get to the board, then you cite the case law and the law and things they understand. But yeah, we win the vast majority of our HLRs. So the next thing is terror, right? So it's part of the PACT Act, toxic exposure risk activity, right? Where which is direct service connection. You're saying if you were exposed to any toxins anywhere, anytime, jet fuel, whatever, no matter where you were, then they have to do a medical opinion. Once they can see the exposure, they have to do a medical opinion, a CMP medical opinion. And if the doc, or the nurse says, yeah, it's at least as likely as not that this cancer was caused by this jet fuel or asbestos or whatever the case may be, you're in. Doesn't happen too frequently. Most of the CMP examiners get it wrong, but we get medical opinions and ultimately win. But they use terror. Like these raiders kind of think everything's a terror, right? Because if it's a terror, then it's limited, the effective date's limited by the PACT Act, right? So just this morning, we get a board decision. This gentleman was at Fort Gordon, which we all know well. That James was the first one to open up that one. He was at Fort Gordon like James. First filed a claim in 2010. Continuously pursued it. Right? We finally get them to concede herbicide exposure at Fort Gordon. We all know it was there, but we know how tough it is in CONUS. So we win that battle. Say, yep, he was exposed. So what effective date did they give? August 10, 2022. Because they said, well, it's a terror. And, if it weren't for terror, we never could have claimed that. So I didn't even bother. I would write, he's AOD. He advanced on docket at the board, went right to the board and just, wrote an argument and said, Your Honor, you can surely see how absurd that is. Terror there was no such thing as terror when he first filed this claim, 12 years ago. And we won, that was, that's what I was telling you about. We actually got a decision in 2 weeks from the board, which was fabulous.
Good.
But, yeah. So he gets his effective date for his cancer all the way back to 2010 at 100% plus SMC. So it's a substantial 6-figure back pay for this guy who absolutely deserves it. But yeah, they like to use that, terror. The effective date is terror. It's, terror is a good thing. Terror is a good thing. I like terror in that it really opens up the world for toxic exposures, right? It's if you get them to concede a terror, now they have to look at if they're exposed to asbestos, if they're exposed to jet fuel, if they're exposed to solvents, all those things. They, and again, they most of the time get it wrong. The CMP examiner will get it wrong. But, once we get that concession that they're exposed to something, then we get our medical experts and we get our independent medical opinions and we win the case. But it's really opened up the world for veterans. It's a good thing. But, not when they use it to limit an effective date. So we'll file an HLR with that. There's also some guidance. It's not in the M21 yet. They haven't put the PACT Act, most of it in the M21, but there's some internal guidance. It's they publish, and I can get it off of VBMS, the PACT Act SOPs, Standard Operating Procedures. So I have all those documents, and I use that to get that. Occasionally, that has to go to the board, like in this instance with the guy at Fort Gordon. But those are definitely winnable. Incorrect dates of supplemental claims, and again, this is It's mind-boggling. Oftentimes, you'll continuously pursue a claim, and they'll give the effective date of the last. So let's say you did an HLR and then you did a supplemental claim, been fighting this for a couple of years. They'll give the effective date of the supplemental claim instead of the original date of claim that's been continuously pursued. And and their rationale is, well, oh, the supplemental claim is to so you wanted to reopen the claim by using the supplement. No, he didn't. It's just it's been continuously pursued using the supplemental claim to appeal it. So that usually can get that fixed with an HLR, but they try that on. And those are the most common. Again, there's more. There's probably double that, but these are the most common, pretty straightforward ones that they just miss, and it's really, honestly, guys, it's to the point where when we get a grant, Katrina and I are shocked nowadays if the effective date's right. It's like I'll look at it. I'll get it off eBay. I say, okay, we got a grant. I'll look at the effective date, and I'll look in our database, and I'll say, honey, you got to look at this. It looks like they got it right. She's like, no way. So she'll go over it too. It's like we're like, I mean, it's gotten to that point. It's unfortunate is that they almost, at least in our practice, they almost never get the effective date right the first time. So
That's right.
it's crazy. This is important. It's important because they're not gonna get that past us. They're not gonna get it past most attorneys.
Hmm.
Definitely slip it past the veteran or
Oh
survivor.
no.
Um,
I
and they might get it past the VSO that's it's kind of new at the game and hasn't been trained by us because we don't train them
I
all.
feel
Um, so
I feel so
it's
bad. That affects your bottom line, Jim.
it
Yeah.
really does, and
Yeah.
sometimes it's a couple of months, but
Hmm.
sometimes a couple of years, sometimes it's a couple of decades.
Hmm.
But at the end of the
See,
day, even if it's a month, that's the veteran's money. That's their
mhm.
survivor's money. VA doesn't have the right to keep it from them.
Mhm.
And again, I don't, maybe they're rushing, and they talk about training issues. Well, sometimes those are training issues, but it's something as simple as
Hmm.
missing an ITF. You can train a monkey to do that. That's easy. Some of this stuff is like this PACAC stuff. It's deep in the weeds, and they've got to learn. I get that, but a lot of these are just really they're really silly. They don't make any sense. But we keep fighting the good fight.
Mhm.
Get them all
See,
the money they deserve.
let me make a little announcement real quick.
Hmm?
This announcement goes out to all you do-it-yourselfers. Some stuff I've been reading lately online, and some stuff that people have been doing. They do their own claims and their own appeals. I would highly recommend you guys find an accredited BSO or an agent to handle your appeal. If not, you're going to have a long wait.
Yeah, I agree. And
Mm-hmm.
and question everything. If you feel like if you get a grant or your VSO gives you a grant and you feel like what I thought I was entitled to earlier than that. I thought I was entitled to more back pay. Question it. Absolutely question. Maybe yes, maybe no, but you know, don't take VA's word for it. Same thing with ratings. If you get what you feel like is a lowball rating, question it. Maybe appeal it. And that's where VSOs and accredited reps can help. It's is when we talk about these effective data errors, we see almost as many rating errors where they're giving you less of a rating than you deserve, and it's
Mm-hmm.
nothing wrong. Nothing wrong with doing it yourself. There's a lot of really good information out there. Um, some of the YouTube channels, some are really bad, but some are really good. There's some law firms out there, um, colleagues of ours that put out great content. They do regular Q&As, and they do, there's you get on there and have professional attorneys explain to you how to do this yourself, and there's nothing wrong with that. But the you know question everything. There's so many nuances, there's so many ins and outs, and for whatever reason, VA is making a lot of errors, and these errors can be costly. A lot of times people think, well, you know what, I've been fighting this for a while, I finally got a grant, I'm not going to rock the boat. I wish I got more, but I'm not. Listen,
That's the most
if
popular. That's the most popular three-letter acronym right now you ever see is DTA, DTA, DTA. I'm
yep,
seeing 4 and 5 a day.
yeah, yeah, it's absolutely crazy. But yeah, I'm hoping. Like I said, after it really the issue really accelerated during the PACT Act, especially in the beginning, and I get that. Again, there's some ins and outs, and they're under pressure, and you got well over 1 million claims, and they're working really hard. So I understand. Um, it got a little bit better, but in these last, probably, I don't know, 3 4 months, when they really started, putting their foot on the gas about the backlog, and you know processing more claims than ever. They reinstituted mandatory overtime. Um, and then, the situation is also there's been a lot of attrition at VA. There's a lot of really good people have left. They've taken the early retirement. Um, and a lot of, from what I understand, not surprisingly, there's some morale issues going on. There's within
Yeah.
the agency, um, the whole Doge and thing. So a lot of them have left, and a lot of law firms, veterans law firms, and stuff like that are I know of personally are scooping up. They are hiring. They're on a hiring train. You work for VA, come work for me. Not us. We're a tiny little office, but these big law firms are come work for me because I'm going to pay you more. I'm going to treat you right, and are you know your stuff. Because think about it, if a law firm has got to hire, like let's say we want to hire a case manager or something like that, right? Think about what the training it would take to get somebody up to speed. As complicated as veterans law is, it
Hmm.
would just take a long time, and it's very expensive too to train people. So you hire somebody, and it might take you 6 months before you can get them to manage your cases, right? Not if they're a former raider or a former VSR or a former DRO. They know the system. Now you might have to re-educate them on their thought process. So, some VA employees are you know
Yeah, get the word
don't
no.
have the
Get the
best
word
attitude.
no, and tell them to forget the word no.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you got to look at it from a different perspective, but that's not hard to do. But
Mm-hmm.
but the thing is, they know, and there's a lot of really good VA employees,
Hmm.
and I think you know many of them are veterans. I honestly think there's a far more really good VA employees than not. But what I've been learning over the years is that the system is really difficult at the regional office level because they have this, quality control teams are up their tail, right? And they're saying, nope, you got that wrong. You shouldn't have granted. You granted too much. They live in abject fear of getting a ding, getting a quality ding. So they become hyper conservative. They're like, I'd like to
Hmm.
grant this. I think the veteran deserves this. but I'm not going to do it because I'm going to get a ding from quality because I just got, I got my butt handed to me last week by QRT, and I don't want another one this month. I'm hearing that in discussions with these, and it's something in the system they need to fix, and that's why it's one of the many reasons why the board is so much better. Not only in its attorneys, judges, they understand the law, but they don't have that. They get to make
Little
independent
process.
decisions, right? They don't have the pressure.
Mhm.
They make decisions, and there's no one second guessing them. Um, and I get it. It's a huge organization. They got 470 or maybe less than that now, but almost a half a million employees, and they have to have controls and they have to have quality, and I get all that, but it's it really does create problems. And then the rushing too. I mean these mistakes because sometimes there'll be like a really dumb mistake. I'll get on Teams and I'll reach out to the rater that made the decision and nicely say, "Hey, I think you missed this. Can you fix this so we don't have to do an appeal?" And they're very hey, sorry about that. I was in a rush. Thank you so much. I'll fix it right away. All right, they'll do that for you for the most part because they want to get it right too. A lot of them, most of them, they want to get it right, and sometimes they rushed and they missed it, and just ask them nicely to if it's something really simple like an ITF. Sometimes I'll reach out and say, hey, you know, respectfully, you missed the ITF. Can you fix? Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, let's and they do it right away. So um, because they don't want to. And I don't know. I've never heard that um, if you grant or if you deny too much, that quality team gets on you. I know if you grant too much, they do. So I don't know that for sure though.
What would be the difference, Jim? Say you get gig by quality, right? Which is my background. Or you lose the BBA. Do you get gig for that?
No, and that's the shame of it. When they started the AMA, part of the AMA, there's supposed to be a feedback loop. And
Mm-hmm.
this was between the board and the regional office. And the board was supposed to do this feedback loop and say, listen, because the board for years is saying, we are seeing so many ridiculous cases that we shouldn't waste our time. We're backlogged because you're getting wrong at the regional office. You're getting wrong really simple things that you shouldn't be. You should know better. These aren't complicated legal issues. So there's supposed to be a feedback loop where they would constantly feedback and show the regional office, so their leadership could get in and say, hey, we need more training on these issues. We're consistently making dumb mistakes here,
Mm-hmm.
right? That never happened for whatever reason. So there is no feedback that way. Now at the
Mm-hmm.
BVA, we know the Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims. There, that the court will constantly, you deny at the board, and it goes to the court. Over eighty
Mm-hmm.
percent of the time, it goes back to VVA, and they say try again. That is professionally embarrassing if you're an attorney and a judge, where another judge says, "Hey,
Mm-hmm.
you got this wrong." So that keeps them honest too. They're like, "Okay, we're going to get this right," because they do have that accountability. Unfortunately, at the regional office level, they really don't. I mean, it's like, okay, you denied, we don't like it, appeal it, go on. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not seeing them get in any kind of trouble from their leadership because they deny too
Mm-hmm.
much, or they mess up
Okay.
effective dates, or they mess up ratings. I I,
Okay.
I may be wrong, but
Yeah,
I'm not seeing
you're
it.
good.
I know if they give too much, they get in trouble. There's unquestionably.
You guys know what happens when you're having fun? Time absolutely flies.
It
And we
does.
are really out of time. We still got some recording left. But Jim, as usual, man, thank you for coming on. I'm pretty sure a whole lot of people have learned something tonight. Not
I
just
hope so.
veterans, but I'm pretty sure agents have learned stuff too.
I
Yeah,
hope
Very.
so.
I was going to expound on what Jim said. I got a friend
Mm-hmm.
that's a comptroller down at Redstone Arsenal. You're exactly right with
Mm,
those quotas and their personnel.
mm,
The people that took the early out, they're still getting paid until the end of September, so they can't
yep.
get
Right.
backfilled. So
Mm,
in October, you're going to have all these. They're going to start a hiring process, but we may be in this situation with them missing stuff and having to meet those quotas for a while
for
because
more.
how long is it going to take to train these new people?
Yeah. Well, what I'm hoping is that, everything comes home to roost. At some point, it's going to come out that this whole kill the backlog, move faster is backfires. Year from now, 2 years from now, we're going to have the same VA secretary for next 3.5 years, right? So at some
Mm,
point, I'm hoping that it's like, it becomes public knowledge that, oh my God, VA is a train wreck. They are wrongfully denying. They're doing all of these extra claims and they're screwing them up. And at some point, maybe there'll be some pressure on VA to say, okay, now we need to slow down and we need to train our people better and we need to get this right because it's a really bad look if veterans, the veteran community out there is saying VA is a mess because they're rushing and they're screwing
mm,
veterans.
yep.
I believe in Santa Claus. So I'm hoping I'm hoping that
That's brought
happens,
up today. That's all right.
but
All
we'll
right.
see.
What do you, man? Thanks for coming on. We'll do this again soon. Since
Absolutely,
we like your
always a pleasure,
information,
John.
and thank you. Tell the missus hello from everybody,
I certainly will. Now that
and
she's
we'll
down
talk
out
to
of the
you.
clouds.
Better keep her busy for a while, man. She's moving too many times hiking and climbing mountains and stuff.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
she's something.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I'm glad you guys stay in shape that way. Well, listen, guys, we do appreciate you watching. We'll be back again next week. We'll have another guest on. I think next week's guest is another attorney out of D.C. No, but I'll advertise her up here at the end of the week. But this is John on behalf of Jim Radonia, and very prayerly, we'll be shutting it down for now. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys. Great seeing
Good
you.
night.
Okay.
All right.